I never thought much about weather until the night the sky cracked open over our little rental outside Enid, Oklahoma, back in June of 2006. I was 24, new to the night shift at the grain elevator, and I came home around sunrise with clothes that smelled like dust and metal. Life was plain then. My truck coughed but ran. My girlfriend, Mara, kept a ceramic bowl of oranges on the counter that we never finished before they bruised. We argued in soft ways about bills and which church to try. The television only pulled in 2 stations if I wrapped the rabbit ears in tinfoil. None of that feels important until a storm turns ordinary things into landmarks you use to find your way back to yourself. The day started bright and sticky, a heat that held your shirt like cling wrap. I slept through the afternoon with a box fan rattling in the window, its cord warm where it crossed my stomach. When I woke, around late evening, by the pink angle of the light, Mara had left a note on the table saying she was helping her sister pack. The note was written with a green pen because the black one had dried out. It said, "Do not worry, I will be late. Eat the last chili." There was a smiley face that sagged, as if tired. I ate the chili cold. The radio said words I did not register until the voice changed from friendly to careful. A warning had been issued. A severe thunderstorm. The county to the west first. Then ours. The map was a patchwork quilt of red and yellow. I had known storms my whole life, but that warning voice pressed a finger to my ribs. I stepped outside with a glass of tap water and watched the sky get the color of a bruise. The wind arrived ahead of the rain, just a thin hand feeling through the trees. Dust lifted from the driveway like breath in cold air. The first thunder walked in on heavy feet, far off but sure of itself. When the rain came, it came in coins, fast and hard, spattering the porch and ringing on the aluminum siding. I stood under the eave and listened to the rhythm change, like the storm was switching drummers. Behind the rain, a lower sound swelled and went away and swelled again. Mara's dog, a healer mix named Jonah, pressed his round head against my knee and trembled. I decided to check the back room for leaks. It was the kind of room landlords call a bonus room, long and thin with a floor that sloped just enough to steal your sense of balance. We kept boxes there, old textbooks, a blender we never used. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like Idaho. I set a mixing bowl beneath it in case it grew. When I turned to leave, the bulb above the door flickered once and blew. I stood a second, letting my eyes catch what little moonless light filtered through the blinds. Winter once left a draft in that room. You could feel it like a whisper. Now the whisper turned into a cold hand. I should have blamed the storm's pressure, the way the house sighed under gusts, but that was not what I felt. It felt like the room had taken a breath that did not belong to it. From outside, thunder crawled over the roof. A line of lightning rolled across the sky like someone tugging a zipper. I could still hear the radio in the kitchen. The announcer repeated that we should shelter. I told myself to move, to go grab my flashlight from the hall closet, but the cold hand of air turned to a presence, quiet and definite. Jonah let out a sound I had not heard before, a low moan with a tremor in it, and backed out of the doorway as if pulled by string. I followed him into the hallway and flipped the switch by habit. The hall light did not come on. The storm had stolen our power. "All right," I said out loud, to no one, the way you talk when you want to hear a human voice. "All right." I reached for the flashlight in the closet by feel. My palms slid along the shelves, rough wood, a bag of potting soil, a jar of screws, and then the cold glass barrel of the flashlight. I clicked it. The beam found dust. It found the denim jacket I wore when the elevator got icy. It found nothing to be afraid of. The backroom door had not latched. It was open the width of my thumb. I did not want to go back in, but the roof over that room was always the first to leak. I swung the beam through the crack. The Idaho stain had grown darker. The bowl below it had a thin, glittering line of water. The light wobbled in my hand. The cold draft lifted the hair on my arms. I pushed the door with my foot and stepped inside. I told myself the pressure drop had pulled air through a gap. I told myself the power cut out because a line got knocked down by a branch. I told myself I was a tired man on a stormy night. I said these things in my head like prayers. The room did not care. There was a shape near the far wall, a human shape, but not in the way of light. It showed itself by what it refused to make visible. The beam dimmed where it passed that way, as if light was a cloth pressed flat by a hand you could not see. I smelled wet canvas. I smelled ozone, that sharp scent after a spark. I said, "Mara," and heard my own voice tremble in a way that embarrassed me. The shape moved, not toward me, not away. It moved like a person shifting their weight as they stand still. Thunder crashed so close, the floor jumped. In the same instant, the shadow gathered into itself and loosened again, like a breath you could see. The rain smacked the window with a burst, so strong it sprayed in through the warped frame. I flinched and raised the flashlight as if it were a shield. The beam traced the shape's outline, which was not an outline at all, but the stubborn absence of reflection. I do not know why I spoke. Maybe because silence felt like an invitation. I said, "I do not want trouble," and I heard the ridiculousness of it as soon as the words left me. That is when the room changed temperature so sharply my teeth ached. I tasted metal. The hair on my neck lifted, and from that dark, featureless, not quite person came the softest sound, a sound I would have called wind, except it had timing and a hitch, the pattern of a sob that has run out of tears. I backed up. If I took 3 small steps, I would be out of the room and could pull the door closed and walk away from the kind of thing you only tell years later when people have had just enough to drink. But behind me in the hallway, another sound answered, a faint tapping like fingers drumming on a table. The taps moved along the wall, reached the door frame, and paused exactly by my left shoulder. I felt colder there. I felt watched not just from the room but from the space around my body, as if something learned the outline of me and was checking its work. I said, "Please." That word came out bare. A new lightning flash lifted the room into a negative photograph. Everything white where it should be dark and black where it should be bright. In that brief light, I saw more than the shape. I saw water vapor swirl as if breathed by a mouth at chest height. I saw the curtain move with no wind. I saw that the shape was not alone. There was a second emptiness by the window, smaller by half, and when the thunder rolled, I heard a tiny echo of the earlier sob, thready and tired. I did not think. I simply reached for the radio in the kitchen by memory, as if that measured voice with county names might make this part of a map. I edged backward, the beam kept on the not-quite figures, and once in the hall, I swung the door shut. The house shifted with a gust, and the latch did not catch. I pressed my palm flat against the door as if I could keep weather from crossing wood. Jonah pressed himself to my shin, shaking so hard his collar clinked. The radio's voice, from the counter, worked like a rope tossed toward me. I walked toward it with my hand still braced on the door, a clown's act you would laugh at if you did not know why it mattered. The radio said the rotation in the cloud had not touched down. They were watching. They would update. I looked at the green note from Mara and thought of how she dotted her exclamation points with little circles. I wanted her home, the way you want a light on a long road. The tapping began again, this time from inside the back room, mapped along the wall, measured and patient. Not a call, not a threat, a pattern. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, a pause, 3 taps. I have no training for storms beyond move to an interior room and keep your head down, but I do know what it feels like when something tries to say I am here without a mouth for words. The pattern repeated, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps. I found a kind of bravery then that had nothing to do with standing tall. I slid my hand away from the door and stepped to the pantry. I took a roll of blue painter's tape and a pencil stub. I do not know why those things made sense, except they were the tools I had when something was broken but fixable. I went back to the door and, with the pencil, tapped twice in answer, a pause, twice again. When the next lightning flash came, it laid one wide hand across the world, and inside that flash, for the heartbeat of it, the tapping stopped. The air changed, not warmer, not colder, different, like when an airplane door opens into a different country and the airport smells like plastic and coffee in a way that does not match your memory. The rain eased, the thunder paced off a little. I opened the door, not completely, but enough, and shined the beam low. The bowl under the stain was half full. The floorboards had gone from dry to dark. The shape was closer to the window now, as if looking out. The smaller absence had stepped between the larger one and the glass, the way a kid hides behind a parent and peeks. I said, "You can stay there if you want." I knew how foolish it sounded and said it anyway. I put the tape across the window frame where the draft was worst, a practical act that let my hands move while the part of me that understood more than hands kept quiet. The tape stuck badly on the damp wood. I smoothed it with my palm. When I crouched to check the bowl, a drip fell on the back of my neck and ran down my spine like a finger. Then, without a sound to mark it, both shapes went thinner. The beam lost less of itself passing there. The next lightning flash showed the room unoccupied, the emptiness distributed again to all the places emptiness should live. Only the draft remained, faint and tired. Jonah barked once, a single bright sound like a doorbell. I stood up slowly. I listened. The tapping did not return. An hour later, the power blinked, held, and the refrigerator coughed to life. The radio returned to earnest jokes between warnings. The storm walked off toward the east with a posture that said it would bother other folks before sunrise. I texted Mara from the old flip phone that made my thumbs feel clumsy. I wrote, "Bad storm, all fine, come home safe." She answered hours later, already on the road, a simple heart spelled out with blunt punctuation. Daylight at last. The yard was full of twigs and leaves stuck to the earth like a collage. The ditch had turned itself into a brown ribbon. I checked the roof for missing shingles and found only one flipped, like a fish scale. I replaced it with a little pride at having something to fix. Inside the back room, the Idaho stain had widened, then dried to a dull map I could trace with a finger. The bowl sat there, half full, proof of something you could talk about without the room going quiet. I emptied it and stood for a minute, waiting for the temperature to tilt or the air to thicken. Nothing happened, nothing at all. I told no one for months. It felt too private, like admitting you saw a neighbor cry through a window. When I finally told Mara, we sat on the porch with coffee you could nearly see through, and she nodded a long time. She said her grandpa used to pause in storms and set an extra plate on the table, not because he expected company, but because company might expect him. The logic fits storms and grief, and the way the world sometimes presses up from a side you do not know you have. Here's the piece that still lives with me, even now that I am older, and the house is someone else's, and the grain elevator has a new owner who fixed the buckling floor and put in a soda machine. Every time thunder stacks up like books in the sky, I feel a kind of neighborly attention pass through me. If lights flicker, I find a bowl and put it under a stain that might not be there anymore. When wind crawls the walls and the radio reads the counties, I listen like I am waiting for a knock. And if something taps, slow and patient, I will answer twice, a pause, twice again, just in case that is a language, and just in case the ones who speak it need to know they were seen and need to know the door is not locked. In the years since, storms have come and gone. I have driven through black sheets of rain that sounded like coins on the windshield. I have sat in motel bathtubs while sirens wailed like mechanical wolves. But that June in 2006 feels like the evening I learned how big a house can be when the world presses against its walls from both sides. It also feels, strangely, like a night that wished me well, in a voice I could not quite hear. What I carry from it is not fear but a peculiar hospitality, a sense that sometimes the weather does not just pass by you. Sometimes it stops and checks if you are awake, and if you answer kindly, it goes on with its business and leaves you with a story shaped like a bowl half full of clean rain. I left Oklahoma the next spring after that storm, not because of it, but because work dried up and Mara's sister knew a guy in Central Florida who could use an extra set of hands repairing docks and screened porches. We landed in a rental near a chain of lakes west of Orlando, a long block house with a carport that tilted like a shrugged shoulder. The yard had sand more than soil. Lizards flicked across the steps like dropped ribbons. Thunder sounded different there, rounder somehow, like it rolled around the horizon and had to decide where to come ashore. It was late summer of 2008 when the second thing happened. I had been down there almost a year, comfortable enough to know which afternoon clouds meant you could keep working and which meant lay your tools down, cover the wood, and get off the ladder. The air had that wet blanket heaviness that comes right before the sky decides to pour. I was patching torn screen on a neighbor's pool enclosure, a neat aluminum cage around an oblong blue, when rain began without warning, a hard slap followed by constant drumming. The owner, an older woman who kept a stack of birdseed bags by her patio door, came out and passed me a towel through the slider. She told me to wait it out. It did not wait. The sky broke into sections. One part white where lightning still lived in it, one part purple like a bruise, one part the odd, stale green that makes your skin remember old sirens. I packed up before the gust front arrived. On my way to the truck, I smelled that smell the asphalt gives when it goes from hot to washed in a second, oily and clean at the same time. I drove the 3 streets home through water that rose fast and rippled as if there were fish underneath. I could feel the tires lighten and grab. When I pulled under the carport, the rain doubled itself and came down sideways. It hit the aluminum posts so hard they seemed to ring. Inside, Mara had set a candle on the table out of habit because the power blinked during the first big boom and she liked to be ready. She made a joke about Florida having only 2 seasons, bright and wet, and we ate peanut butter on white bread, and I tasted salt from sweat more than the peanut butter itself. When she left for a late shift at a diner near the highway, we shared a look both of us understood. The one that says, "Drive slow, lights on, come back." The house had a back room, like a lot of those low Florida places, a sort of half porch with jalousie windows, narrow glass slats that tilt with a crank. The room was more porch than house, but we kept a second-hand couch in there, and a bookcase that leaned, and a lamp that made everything look like late afternoon. It was where I stretched my back after jobs and listened to baseball on the radio, even when the Marlins were out of it. The storm gathered itself and stayed. Sheets of rain, then sudden outages where light fell through like a curtain being snapped back and forth. The wind came at the windows in pulses. I sat on the couch with a dog-eared manual for small engines open on my knee and the radio low enough to be companionable. The announcer was listing flooded intersections in a voice that made the bad news sound like what you expect. There is a sound a wet palm frond makes when it slaps aluminum. You can live in Florida a week and you will know it. The first of those slaps made me jump a little. The second made a smaller version of the same jump. By the third, I had it filed under ordinary. The fourth was not ordinary. It sounded like a hand, not a frond, not something blown, but something with aim. A palm would strike high, and showers of water would follow. This came from lower than that, right about the place on the jalousie where you would tap if you wanted someone's attention. I turned down the radio to quieter than companionable. I listened. Rain shouted its same old song. Thunder turned the street into a drum. Then again, a measured tap on the glass slats, not a pound, not a scratch, not a random ricochet. 1 tap, a pause, 2 taps close together, like a person making sure you knew they were counting. I could have told myself a seed pod or a beetle the size of a walnut had flung itself perfect, but I did not. I stood and set the manual on the arm of the couch with care, as if how I put down a book could change what was tapping. When I cranked the jalousie handle, the smell of rain hit like an open bottle of something sharp. Water blew in to pattern the tile with dull coins. I leaned my head out into the carport gloom. The neighbor's flood gutter gushed. Streetlights burned and halos you could almost squeeze. There was no one by the window. There was nothing except rain that had learned to fall in sideways letters. Then, from down near the concrete, about ankle height, another tap, then that double tap like a little drum roll. You are a grown man in a boxy room. You know this is foolish. But there are times when the reasonable thing will not let you move, and only the foolish will. I went for the flashlight anyway, the same silver barrel I kept near the door with the spare batteries that never matched their package. I clicked it and sent a circle of light across the concrete. I saw the 2 lawn chairs we found at a yard sale, their webbing faded to the color of old toothpaste. I saw my toolbox with the latch missing. I saw a pair of footprints I did not want to see, made not by feet, but by a dry way water ran around something that had been there a breath ago. Tiny, bare, toes that looked like dots pressed in dust. I aimed the beam toward the end of the carport, where the stucco wall met a skinny bed of swamp plants. The light climbed the paint and slid off. There is a way light looks when it gets swallowed by warm, wet air. It hangs there like breath. In that breath, I thought I saw movement, not of a shape, but of leaning, the way weeds lean when a small body hurries past. The thunder shouted again, and the pool cage 2 houses down lit up white and then called itself back into the same gray. The taps did not repeat. The rational part of me could have shut the window and locked it and gone to the inner room and waited. But the house belonged to the storm now, and to shut anything felt rude, the way you do not slam a door while someone is walking up your steps. I left the windows tilted open a finger and went to the kitchen. The power held long enough for the coffee maker to grumble. I poured half a mug and sat on a stool, watching rain march through the carport like soldiers. It came again, not as a tap, but as something soft passing by the threshold. A sweep of cool air that smelled like hair and wet cloth and the faint mildew of a drawer that has not been opened in a while. With it came a feeling so strong I had to put the mug down. It was not fear. It was the exact pressure in the chest you get when you are late to meet someone and see them still waiting for you, patient in a place where they do not know anybody. I have no idea why I spoke the way I did. Maybe because people in storms have polite bones. Maybe because Florida had taught me that anything can end up on your porch, and it is better to say hello before you decide what to do next. I said, "It is okay," and I meant only that I would not slam the window. In answer, there was the smallest sound I have ever heard that still had a shape. It was a small laugh that had very little laugh left in it. It was not near my ear or out in the rain. It was in the space between, right where the carport floor darkens to meet the weather. A car went by too fast and smacked the puddle at the corner, and water lifted in a sheet and fell back and made clapping sounds against the hurricane fence. Headlights swung across the carport. In that quick light, I saw what I would describe, if I had to, as a boy about 5, and not at all in the way of a photograph. I saw him the way you see your own hand in the dark when you move it slowly. He was inside the wet air more than he was in the light. Dark hair stuck to his forehead, a shirt with a big shape on it, maybe a whale or a bus, bare legs, bare feet. He was not soaked the way a body gets. He was wet the way a story gets when you tell it in a place where it rained. He stood looking at the back door like someone checking an address twice. When my brain caught up to what my eyes were trying to make sense of, the headlights had gone, and he was only a suggestion. I found the door handle with my damp hand and pulled it open in the slow way people do when they send a message that they are not going to rush anybody. The air pressed in. The boy lifted his face, and I knew, in a twist of the heart that felt like falling down one step, that he was not looking at me. Not really. He was looking through to a room that was not mine anymore, and someone who was not me. I heard my voice say, "Do you need to come in?" He did not answer in words. He came forward the smallest half step, as if a thread tugged. Then the thunder stacked itself so close, it rattled the glasses in the cabinet, and the dog next door went off like an alarm. In the same instant, the boy flickered. Not the way a light does when power dips, the way a memory does when something else takes your attention. I saw him turn his head like he heard his name and take another half step, and it was not toward me. I will never know if what I did mattered. I stepped to the side, the old southern show of welcome that lives in a body even if you were born far from there, and I said, "It is dry in here," and then because dry is not always what people need, I added, "You can sit wherever." My voice shook exactly on the word wherever. I could feel the skin of my arms pebble as if a draft had found me. The candle on the table made its small, determined flame. The boy hesitated in that not quite place beneath the tilting glass slats. Then the rain changed and came in a little harder, and the carport hummed, and he went thin again, then thinner, and the space filled back up with plain air. It would be a cleaner story if something moved on my counter, or a wet footprint dried itself into a shape, or the radio picked up a name through static. None of that happened. The storm worked at the gutters, resigned and energetic. The thunder walked itself farther away and shorter, like a man who knows he has said his piece. I stood there at the open door and felt that pressure in my chest ease, as if a decision had been made that did not involve me. The candle leaned and corrected itself. I closed the door a finger, then another. I left it unlatched. When Mara came home near midnight, she was a damp halo of diner smell, coffee and grill, and the lemon stuff they use on tables. She saw my face before I said anything, and her expression did a quiet inventory, like the ones nurses do. I told her I had heard tapping and opened the windows, and she tilted her head and said, "From Storm or from someone?" And I said, "Maybe both." I did not tell her the boy part for a month. When I did, she sat on the carport steps with her ankles crossed like a kid and told me how, back when her brother was little, he wandered out during a thunderstorm and sat in the driveway just to watch water, and how her mama found him because he kept slapping puddles and laughing at how the sound changed, hand to water to hand. The story felt like a string tied in the room to keep it from floating off. Later, on a drier day, I asked the older woman with the bird seed if she had ever heard about accidents on the street in storms past, not because I needed a headline to staple to what I had seen, but because humans like labels for drawers. She shook her head and said the usual things about lightning and power lines and drivers who could not stand to slow down. Then she said some families move a lot down here. People come and go. You sometimes think ghosts are tragedies when they could just be ordinary people who did not get to say goodbye to a room they loved. I carried that line around like a folded bill. A week later, I fixed the screen I had left when the rain came sideways. I stood on the ladder, and a wind reached up from the lake and made the screen humming in a tiny thunder of its own. I remembered the footprints that were not footprints because they were only how water moves around where feet have been. I got down and sat on the carport steps with a mug of weak coffee and watched a young father across the way show his daughter how to keep her hand flat so a lizard could run across her knuckles without biting. The sky was clear. It looked like an empty room you had not finished living in yet. When storms rolled in after that, I did the simple things. I set the candle out. I checked the radio batteries. I tilted the windows open just enough to make the house feel honest. Every now and then, through thick rain that tried to make the outside into a single curtain, I would hear a tap, not a warning, not a demand, just that small, patient drumroll that means someone, somewhere, is trying to ask permission without waking anybody. If it came, I answered the way you answer a knock in a place where weather has the right to be in the room with you. I said, "It is okay." Sometimes the air leaned in, sometimes it did not. Either way, morning showed up, patient as always, with sand clinging to the tires and the street glittering with what storms leave behind. Years have gone by since that long Florida summer. We moved north, eventually, when work shifted, and we missed seasons with edges. I cannot smell hot rain without feeling that steady little pressure in my chest, the half-worried, half-hopeful feeling of a person you have not yet met, standing somewhere at the edge of your porch. When thunder stacks up in the distance, I still leave a door unlatched in my head, not to invite trouble, just to make space for company that might not have the right words. That night passed, and so did we from it, carrying only the softest wet footprints anyone ever left, the kind that do not stain, just teach you to look down now and then and be gentle to the floor that holds you. By the time we left Florida for North Carolina, I thought the worst storms were behind me. We settled in a small town near Asheville, in a rented cottage at the edge of the woods, where the trees were so tall they looked like they were trying to prop up the clouds. The place had a quiet kind of charmwood smoke in the mornings, the smell of rain even when it wasn't raining. We moved in during late September of 2009, and for a few months everything was just steady work, long drives, and the sound of cicadas that somehow made loneliness feel smaller. Then came the night the mountain thunder spoke. It was a Friday. Mara had gone to visit her mother in Knoxville for the weekend, and I was alone with the dog, a newer one we'd picked up from a shelter. His name was Duke, an older shepherd mix with kind eyes and a limp that made his footsteps uneven. The forecast said a thunderstorm, but here storms climbed slow, like they were testing the ridges before they made a move. I remember how the air got that still weight, like the world was holding its breath. I lit a single lamp by the window and read a paperback I'd found in the previous tenant's closet, a mystery novel with the last few pages missing. It was just after midnight when the wind shifted. I heard the trees start to move all at once, that long shh sound they make when their leaves turn in the same direction. Then thunder cracked, not distant, not rolling, but sudden and close enough to shake the frame of the house. Duke lifted his head and made a low, questioning sound. I told him it was fine. I even laughed when the lamp flickered. But inside me, something quiet remembered the back room in Oklahoma and the boy in Florida. And that laugh came out thinner than I meant. The power went out not long after that, and the only light was the flash from the window when the sky decided to tear itself open. The lightning didn't come in flashes like before it stayed, long enough to show the woods behind the house, all silver trunks and bending branches, and then went dark again, like someone pulling a sheet. I thought about getting a flashlight, but the nearest one was in the kitchen drawer across the room, and the dark between me and that drawer looked too thick. Then came the knock, not from the door. From the back of the house, the side that faced the woods. A single, heavy knock, not like a branch or a raccoon. It had weight, human weight. I froze. Duke got off his mat, all stiff-legged and alert, tail down. He looked toward the sound and gave one short bark, then another, then silence. The rain had gone sideways, hitting the windows like a handful of thrown nails. I told myself it was just a tree limb, maybe wind pressing something loose against the siding. Still, I couldn't ignore the second knock. It came slower, more deliberate 3 beats, like the rhythm someone might use if they were cold and wanted help. I grabbed the flashlight and went to the back door. The air had a strange thickness, heavy with ozone, but also a smell like wet stone, old and sour. I pulled the curtain aside. The yard was half lit by the lightning above the ridge. For a split second, I saw something that made my scalp tighten, a figure standing at the tree line. It wasn't close, maybe 30 feet away, but I knew what I saw. The shape was too still. The light hit it once, and in that light, it looked wrong, like it was facing the trees, not the house, but its head, if that was its head, was turned toward me. When the dark came back, my breath sounded too loud. Duke whined and pressed against my leg. I wanted to call out, to say something, but my voice stayed low, as if the air itself didn't want sound in it. I turned the lock, hand shaking, and waited. Nothing moved, just the wind starting up again, rushing through the branches in a way that sounded almost like a whisper, almost like words you couldn't quite catch. The storm rolled closer. Thunder sounded like it was walking down the valley, hitting each hill before it reached us. I sat in the chair by the window, flashlight off, letting my eyes adjust. Every few minutes, lightning would reach across the sky and show the world in white for a breath. I stared toward the woods each time, thinking maybe I'd imagine the figure. But every flash showed something new, first empty trees, then a blur, then what looked like a hand on the old fence post near the back gate. Once, I thought I saw movement, a small sway, as if someone were breathing there, just outside the circle of rain. And then, clear as anything, there came a voice. It was soft, carried by the wind, hard to place. It said, "Let me in." Just 3 words, but said slow, like the mouth that made them had forgotten how to speak. It didn't sound like a cry for help. It sounded like an echo. Duke growled low and deep. My throat went dry. I didn't move. I didn't answer. The thunder broke again, and the voice came once more, clearer this time, right by the wall. "Let me in." Not angry, not pleading, calm, almost rehearsed. I turned the flashlight toward the back door and saw the curtain lift, though the window was closed. Just a soft flutter, like breath on glass. The power came back then, sudden as the lightning, lamps blinking to life. The radio on the counter sputtered, then steadied on a voice, reading storm warnings. I stood still for a long time, waiting for my pulse to match the room again. The woods outside looked calm, washed clean, as if the storm had rinsed away whatever had been there. But I knew better. When morning came, the world was the color of wet paper. I walked out to the yard. The grass was pressed flat, the fence post damp and dark. There were footprints in the mud, not bare, not booted, something between, shallow but shaped. I followed them a few feet before they stopped, like whoever made them had simply faded mid-step. The air was still cold, and though the sun had pushed through, the trees held on to a hush that felt almost like waiting. I went back inside and found Duke sitting by the back door, staring at the curtain. He didn't move until I touched him, and even then, his ears stayed fixed toward the woods. Later that day, I talked to an older man at the hardware store in town, the kind of man who knows every story people whisper but don't write down. When I mentioned the ridge, he nodded slow, said something about a hiker who went missing years back, right before a thunderstorm, and how sometimes, after the big ones, people hear knocking, like he's still trying to come home. I never told Mara. Some things live better in silence, but every time thunder gathers in the mountains now, I get that same low pressure behind my ribs. Sometimes, I think I hear the faintest sound, a soft rhythm against the glass, one knock, then three, like someone keeping count of how long I'll remember. And I do remember, always during storms, always when the light flashes long enough to make the world look half-finished, I think of that voice and those footprints that stopped mid-step, as if the earth had let go. It was early spring of 2010 when Mara and I left North Carolina for good. We drove north with the back of the pickup piled high, Duke wedged between boxes and blankets. We told ourselves we wanted to be closer to her family, maybe start fresh somewhere with steadier work and fewer storms. What we didn't say out loud was that both of us had started to flinch when thunder rolled over the hills. It wasn't fear exactly, but a kind of muscle memory. We ended up in a small rental outside of Erie, Pennsylvania, a plain, beige-sided house with a cracked driveway and a view of the lake through bare trees. It was colder there, the kind of cold that smells clean even when it's dirty. You could hear the wind long before you felt it, and storms didn't fall down from the sky like they did in Oklahoma or Florida. They came in sideways, scraping off the lake, bringing a gray that could last for days. That first winter, everything was fine, routine, simple. I found a job in a small auto shop that mostly handled tire rotations and brake lines. Mara worked at a grocery store that smelled like coffee and disinfectant. We'd go out for diner breakfasts on my days off, talk about getting a dog fence built, talk about maybe painting the kitchen. All the things you say when life is level and quiet, but quiet can get thin after a while. The storm that changed things wasn't a thunderstorm, not at first. It started as a windstorm, one of those early spring tantrums the lake throws when winter doesn't want to leave. The air had a bite to it but carried a kind of wet electricity that felt familiar. The forecast said gusts over 50 miles an hour, maybe power lines down. I checked the flashlights, filled a couple of jugs with water just in case. Mara teased me about being the storm guy now. We laughed, but under that laugh I think both of us were waiting for something. By late evening, the wind had turned mean. It howled in the eaves, rattled the siding, made the gutters groan. The power flickered and came back, flickered again. Duke paced, nails clicking on the kitchen floor. When the first crack of thunder rolled in distant, but definite, it felt like someone we used to know had just walked back into the room. I remember standing by the front window, watching branches whip back and forth like angry arms. The air outside was silver and wet, the kind of light that doesn't come from the sun or the moon, just the sky tearing itself open. Then the phone rang. Not the cell, the old landline that came with the house, the one no one ever used. I looked at Mara, and she looked at me like, "You gonna get that?" I picked it up. At first, all I heard was static. Not the sharp kind, but a soft, rolling hiss like wind over a microphone. I said hello twice, maybe 3 times. Then there was a voice, faint and hollow, like it was traveling a long way through something wet. It said, "You left the light on." That was all. 3 words. The same rhythm, the same calm tone as the voice that had once asked to be let in. I froze. Mara saw my face and mouthed, "What?" I couldn't answer. I just put the phone down, not hanging up, just setting it gently on the counter like it might break if I moved too fast. Duke started to growl then, low and steady, not looking at me, but at the hallway that led to the back of the house. The bulb in the kitchen ceiling blinked twice and went out. Only the lamp in the living room stayed lit, throwing a small, trembling glow into the hallway. I followed Duke's gaze. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with family photos left by the last tenants, people I didn't know, smiling in sweaters from the 90s. The air there looked thicker, the way it does when a storm presses close to the walls. Then came the smell, not ozone this time, but wet earth, like soil turned over after rain. I took a few steps down the hall. My own reflection in one of those glass frames seemed to flicker, as if the light behind it was moving. Then the thunder hit, a deep, rolling sound that shook the windows, and in the flash of lightning through the back door, I saw something standing near the end of the hallway. It wasn't close, it wasn't even clear. Just the suggestion of a figure, pale where the light hit it, featureless, still. I blinked and it was gone, but the space it had filled stayed heavy, like air after someone leaves a room. I walked to the end of the hallway, every step slow enough for my heartbeat to catch up. The back door was locked, but the curtain moved as if someone had just brushed past it. The smell of earth got stronger. Behind me, Duke barked one sharp, panicked sound, and the landline phone began to ring again. I turned, half running back toward the kitchen, but before I reached the counter, the phone stopped. The silence that followed was so sudden it hurt. Mara came up beside me, eyes wide, whispering, "Who was it?" Before I could answer, a light flared at the back window, a quick, blinding flash, and the thunder rolled almost on top of it. Every light in the house went out. The only thing left was the sound of wind and our breathing. We stood there, listening. Then came the tapping, soft, deliberate, from the back door. 1, pause, 2, pause, 1. The same slow rhythm I'd learned to recognize. Mara whispered, "It's just the wind." But her voice cracked halfway through, and we both knew she didn't believe it. The tapping stopped. Then, so quiet it might have been imagination, we heard the same voice again, muffled through the walls, like a whisper buried in the storm. "You left the light on?" Mara clutched my arm, and Duke barked again, backing up. I reached for the flashlight and clicked it on. The beam caught the back door curtain still swaying, though there was no draft. Then the bulb in the flashlight dimmed, not dead, just fading like something was swallowing the light instead of breaking it. And just as suddenly as it all started, it was over. The thunder moved off, the wind softened, the lights flickered back to life. When I checked the back door again, the floor was wet, but not from a leak. Just a small puddle in the shape of a shoe print, as if someone had been standing right there. The next morning, the air was clear, washed clean by the storm. The puddle had dried, but a faint ring remained, and when the sunlight hit it, I could see tiny scratches in the wood beneath, like someone had dragged a key across it. We moved out 2 months later, no real reason, just restlessness, or maybe the quiet way people try to leave something behind without admitting what that something is. I've lived through plenty of storms since, and most of them are just weather. But sometimes, when I see lightning flash too long, or hear thunder roll without rain, I think of that voice on the line, and those words that didn't quite sound like a warning or a threat, just a reminder. You left the light on, and maybe I did. Maybe we all do. Maybe that's what storms are for, to show us what's still glowing when everything else goes dark. It was the summer of 2011 when the last one happened, though I didn't know it would be the last until much later. By then, Mara and I had settled in a small town in Ohio, not far from the border where the flat farmlands start to rise again. Life had steadied. We'd bought an old single-story house with chipped white paint and a porch that leaned toward the road like it was tired but still listening. I was 30 now, older in ways that don't show in mirrors. I had made peace with storms, or so I told myself. They still came, the same way they always had, but I learned to sit with them. I'd turn off the television, pour coffee, and just let the sound roll through. Mara would tease that I was like an old farmer watching the sky for omens, and maybe she was right. Duke had grown gray around the muzzle, content to lie by the window even when the thunder cracked close. Then one night, in late July, a storm rolled in that felt different from the start. The air was thick before sunset, heavy with that smell of metal that always means lightning is thinking about finding you. The weather radio said it would be a big one, strong cells forming west and moving fast. I checked the porch light, the same one I had replaced just a week before. It burned steady and warm. By 9 o'clock, the world was flashing more than it was dark. Rain came sideways across the fields, hammering the tin mailbox like fists. Mara went to bed early, said she was tired. I stayed up with Duke, sitting in the living room by the front window, half dozing with the soft hum of the fan. When the thunder came, it shook the window panes so hard they buzzed like old glass about to shatter. Then I heard it, that sound I hadn't heard in over a year. A knock, not the polite kind, a heavy, deliberate knock at the door, 3 even hits, slow and steady. I froze, every hair on my arms rising like static. Duke lifted his head, ears flat, growling under his breath. The clock on the wall read 10:38. Rain sheeted against the window so thick I couldn't see the porch. Another 3 knocks, exactly the same. I reached for the flashlight I kept on the shelf, though the power hadn't gone out yet. The beam cut across the room, shaking in my hand. I walked to the door, telling myself it could be a neighbor, maybe a car stuck in the flooded road, but something in me knew it wasn't. The space just before a storm breaks has a kind of silence, and that same silence now pressed against the walls of the house, too full, too heavy. When I pulled back the curtain on the front window, lightning lit up the yard and there was someone standing at the edge of the porch steps. Tall, motionless, no umbrella. Rain slashed across them, but they didn't move, didn't flinch. For a second, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from the trees. But then the next flash came, and I saw it clearer, a man, or the shape of one, drenched, head tilted, hands hanging loosely at his sides. And then, as the thunder rolled, I realized I could see the porch railing right through him. He lifted one hand, slow, like someone waving from far away. The porch light above the door flickered. Then the voice came quiet, but carried by the air the way a whisper can travel even through a storm. "You still have it." I couldn't answer. My mouth went dry. Lightning hit close this time, so bright it turned everything white for a heartbeat. When the world came back, the porch was empty. The door shuddered once, hard, like someone had pressed against it from the outside. Duke barked, sharp and afraid, then ran to the hallway, tail tucked. The power cut out at the same moment, plunging everything into black. The flashlight in my hand dimmed the way it always did, not dying, just losing its strength. Like light wasn't allowed to stay long. I turned in a slow circle, heart pounding, and caught a faint movement in the reflection of the window. Something, or someone, walking down the hallway toward Mara's room. I shouted her name and ran after it, but the hallway stretched longer than it should have. My feet hit the floor heavy and distant, like the sound was coming from somewhere else. For a second it felt like I was running through water. When I reached the bedroom, the door was open. Mara sat up, eyes wide in the dim blue light from the window. "Did you see it?" she whispered before I could say anything. "See what?" I asked. She pointed toward the corner of the room. Lightning flashed again, and for the briefest instant, there was a figure there. Not the man from the porch, not the boy, not the shadow from Oklahoma, but something between all of them, a shape built from every storm I'd ever known. I couldn't make out a face, only the outline of someone standing still in the rain that wasn't supposed to be inside. Then it was gone. The thunder cracked right above us, so loud it made the walls tremble. Duke barked and barked until his voice broke. Mara was shaking, whispering. It said something. I leaned close, still holding her hand. What did it say? She swallowed hard. It said thank you. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The storm kept on, but softer now, like it was tired too. Eventually the lights came back, blinking weakly. The house looked normal again, just wet and quiet and ordinary. We didn't sleep much that night. When morning came, the porch was covered in muddy footprints that led from the steps to the door and then stopped, like someone had stepped right up to the threshold and disappeared. The light above the door, the one that had flickered, was burned out completely. I didn't replace it. A week later, Mara and I packed up for good. We told friends we were chasing work, but it wasn't that. I think both of us just needed to keep moving, like if we stayed too long anywhere, the storms would find us again. Years have passed since then. I'm older now, and the world feels slower. Mara and I split eventually. No hard words, just distance that grew quietly. Duke's gone too. I live near a smaller lake these days, where thunder rolls soft over the hills. Every summer, when the sky turns that deep bruised gray and the air smells like metal, I sit on the porch with the lights off and listen. Sometimes, if the rain hits just right, I hear that rhythm again. One knock, pause, two, pause, one faint and steady, as if someone far away is keeping time with the weather, and I don't feel afraid anymore. I just sit there and whisper back the same words I've carried all these years. It's okay, you can rest now. Then the thunder moves on and the storm passes, and I am left with that old, quiet understanding that some things in this world don't haunt to hurt us. They just want to be remembered. and maybe that's all I was ever meant to do.